Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments HQ, a podcast sharing, exploring, and celebrating stories of change through mindset and wellness and their impact on relationships. We are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Melissa Robena, along with my co-host, Siria Gutierrez. On this episode, we discuss appreciative resilience, what it means, and how this daily practice can help sustain you during challenging times. Joining us in our discussion are Jeanie Cockell and Joan McArthur-Blair, the pioneers of appreciative resilience. So I know that I've mentioned appreciative resilience before, and the reason why I feel like that it's percolating for me is as a result of the pandemic. And I know listeners are probably like, oh my God, another episode of the pandemic, because we just released the pandemic anniversary episode. But I think the reason why it's so important for me is because I know I joke that being an introvert, when we were first sheltering in place and people were checking in and like, hey, Melissa, how are you doing? I'm like, I've been training my whole life for this very moment.
Yes, you have.
I'm fine. But as the days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, I found that my resilience was starting to diminish. Mm-hmm. And the best analogy that I could think to kind of describe or paint the picture of what I'm feeling is if you're walking into the ocean and you have that rogue wave that just comes and like knocks you down and you pop back up, and it might have startled you. You might laugh it off. But for me, I felt as if the longer the pandemic went on, it was just like wave would hit me and I'd get knocked down and I'd pop back up and another one would come in, knock me down. And I think when we're talking about resilience, specifically appreciative resilience, I think that it could serve as a great tool and a great model for myself and maybe for our listeners to not only have the strength to pop back up out of the water after being hit by a rogue wave or three, but also the strength to actually walk out of the water.
Right. Well, because even with your example, right, every single time you get hit by one of those waves, not only are you going down, you're also collecting sand. And I know like it'll get everywhere in the swimsuit and you're just like every single time, like, all right, it gets harder and harder to get up. Mm-hmm. But eventually you have to, right? Because the last thing you want is for the ocean to actually take you away. So I think that's a really good visual of how you're looking at it. For me, appreciative inquiry overall is a thing that I'm familiar with because of you, mm-hmm. right? I didn't know about it before in my own learnings. And even though I'm a lifelong learner, it had not popped up yet. Positive psychology had, and that was definitely something that I've been involved in and learning. So this one I'm really curious about because I want to see how it's different from resilience and grit. So adding that appreciative aspect to it is something that I want to know just more about it. I'm just curious to see how it plays out, what that difference is, because for me, being someone who has had a lot of trauma in their life, my thought on resilience and grit is you get it by going through stuff. Mm-hmm. And so this idea, I hear a lot of academics talking about, we need our kids to be more gritty. We need to show them more stuff. And, the more grit they have, the better they're going to do. And for me, there's a disconnect because I don't think you can teach it. And so if there's a way for you to do that through appreciative resilience, I'm totally open to hearing and just learning more about it.
And that is why I'm so excited to bring my friends, Jeanie Cockell and Joan McArthur-Blair, who are co-authors of Appreciative Resilience and co-presidents of Cockell McArthur-Blair Consulting that specializes in collaboratively designing strategies with clients to surface their wisdom in order for them to build positive futures and to respond effectively to change. So welcome, ladies.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
So I figure we'll just start off with what is kind of like telling off of what Siria said. What is appreciative resilience?
I'll start. Appreciative resilience kind of takes those practices of appreciative inquiry, seeking to understand what is life-giving, to be fully aware, to be curious and inquire, and really applies them to the practice of resilience. Because, you said this in the introduction, resilience is about going through things, and we believe resilience is a practice, something that we can practice and hone over time. And we all experience hope, despair, and forgiveness. And so appreciative resilience is really thinking about how we are in those states of hope and despair and forgiveness in our lives, and the ways in which we undertake to appreciate what is, to be fully aware, to inquire into what you possibly might experience.
To me, it's opportunity to actually see the opportunities. Yes, we've got, under the pandemic, all sorts of stuff has happened. And I love your metaphor. Joan's using the metaphor one, but I love your metaphor of the ocean, because I feel like that too, just whacked. Because I'm homebody. So I actually like being home, right? And I like Joan, and, we get to be home together and all that stuff. But one of the things that has happened around us in our community is people have taken on the ocean. Like, normally people don't go out and swim in the Pacific Ocean in their bathing suits in the wintertime. And today, when we went for our little walk midday, it was sunny out, but it's not very warm. It's not very warm at all. And 2 women came out of their house with their bare legs showing and just their coats on over top. And the next thing you know, they're joining somebody else who's swimming back and forth in our favorite bay in the ocean. And it wasn't a whacking type of day, because it was perfectly calm. Mm-hmm. But to me, they were taking this practice that has happened in this city here over the last, because when we first moved here, 4 years ago or something, 5 years ago, couldn't find, like, because in Nova Scotia, we had all sorts of buddies that swam, but we couldn't find anybody that was swimming in the ocean. So have we actually done it yet? No, but not in the wintertime, and still with wetsuits on. So, the whole notion of resilience is, what tools do you need? What opportunities are in front of you? Where's your bravery? I mean, because what people are getting out of doing these swims, and they're just their swimsuits in the ocean, is an amazing benefit to their health. So they're working on their health. We're going on way more long walks, and even though we haven't swum yet in the ocean this winter, but we are working on that. Like, we're taking that opportunity at the time, because resilience requires physical resilience as well as to help your mental and spiritual and heartfelt resilience. All of those things must go together. So it's big.
I love that point that you make, because really it is a mind-body experience, right? You can't just focus on the body and expect your mind to follow along. It's like, no, you have to do both of them. And I was listening to somebody earlier today, and in a business context, they were saying you can't have only business development and no personal development. You need to have both. And that's kind of what I'm feeling. It's like, yeah, you need to have all of these pieces to have that balance, is really what, I'm doing that with my hands right now, because that's what I feel like it needs to be, right? That mind and body.
And very much. And for me, powerfully in appreciative resilience, in appreciative inquiry work, we seek to understand what it is we want to focus on. What are the big questions we want to ask? And, to kind of see if we can just, torture this metaphor to death. One of the things that I love about being in the ocean is, when you turn your back to the wave, it will take you down. Mm-hmm. But when you turn your face to the wave, you feel it coming, and you feel that energy building to leap just as it meets your body. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly it rides with you. And so I think a lot of appreciative resilience too is that practice of altering our gaze. How are we looking at something? How might we look at it differently? What might we pull, tiny strength we might pull on in this situation before the wave takes us down?
In being a practitioner in AI, I often hear people saying that, okay, well, by you practicing reframing, you're living in an alternate reality, like you're not being realistic. What do you say to people when you're talking about reframing or looking at the good in the situation?
Well, I think for me, my person I always go to in deeply understanding reframing is Viktor Frankl. His experience during the Holocaust, the ways in which he sought to find humanity within something that was so inhumane. And so I think there's such power in reframing. It is not turning away from the issue. It is not deeply not knowing that it's not there. It is not that. It is seeking to ask the question, is there something here, as tiny as it might be, that might sustain me through this time? And that, to me, is the art of reframing. It's not turning your back on what is going on. It's actually saying, is there something here that I might see anew?
Ooh, that gave me chills.
And we saw, can I tell you a story?
Of course.
Of course.
On Tuesday, March 23rd, this week, we celebrated by telling the story of a very serious car accident that I was in 11 years ago now. And it was quite powerful. Appreciative Inquiry is about telling stories. It's narrative-based research, it's narrative-based communication, it's narrative-based how human beings connect to one another. And connecting to one another is so key to resilience. So this story is about me going off and teaching some people how to do appreciative inquiry and being really excited. I'd been away for a couple of days. Joan had been somewhere else, way far away, speaking at a conference or something. And I was really excited because the actual 2-day training went really well, because I went in nervous because one of them was a doctor researcher who said, why would we be doing this kind of research in order to inform our planning? As it was all addiction services, and it's kind of like we don't need this kind of stuff. Well, after the 2-day training, he said everybody should be doing it. He was the most wow advocate for appreciative inquiry. Anyways, I packed my last memory in this experience of a car accident. My last memory was packing up the trunk of my car with all my facilitator tools and driving home. But I never got home, and I don't remember anything else except several days later when I woke up in a hospital bed and I wasn't able to speak because I was intubated. Found that out later. I don't know why I couldn't speak. Couldn't move because I had broken ribs, and my left femur was totally crushed. My heart was compromised. My lung was punctured. That's why I was intubated, because they had to put a tube in so I could breathe.
Pelvis was broken in 4
Pelvis
places.
was broken, so on and so on.
All your
Bleeding.
limbs were broken.
I was internally bleeding. I damaged my head. I wonder why I am like I am. And it's like I've had this thing. Anyways, I woke up. I mean, Joan said I was in and out of consciousness. I'd had an operation to put up. And she had to make all the decisions. A titanium nail in the left femur, and just controlling all the blood. I mean, all that stuff there. I mean, she lived through wondering whether I was actually going to live. And the medical people didn't give her much hope. They said, get any close relatives out here visiting her because she may not make it in the next 24 hours. But me, several days later, my only awareness came several days later after she's through all this trauma, is being aware that I was in a hospital and Joan was there, and my sister, who lives on the other side of the country, was there at the end of the bed. I'm going, oh my God, what's going on? Doctors and nurses are running around, and as I said, I was intubated. I couldn't move. But my practice in appreciative inquiry always comes through in the most traumatic of times. I had this awareness that something weird was going on. I had no idea what it was, but I was alive. And I was meant to be alive. And I was surrounded by love. And anyways, several years later, we wrote a book, and in it, we put a model called the Alive Model. Anyways, you learn from some of these things to take out into the world. But one of the biggest things I took was this notion of reframing. Because I lay there and went, I'm alive. That's a good thing. I'm meant to be in the world. I'm meant to stay in this world for a while longer. And I kept saying, well, what is it I can do now? Well, I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, but I could kind of smile and just listen and be aware of what's going on and look curious because I couldn't talk, right? So I could practice appreciative inquiry without even, sort of consciously doing that. But it's one of those things that the more you practice appreciative inquiry, the more you practice reframing, looking for what's working right now, looking for strengths in the situation, success. The more you do that, the more you start to see it. It becomes just a natural part of the way of being. Even when I cried when they rolled me over to wash my back. I mean, every time they rolled me over, I said, oh, I can't do this. And then when they, a week later, after I arrived, which is hard, they didn't even think I was going to live. The nurse said, well, the doctor says that the pelvic brakes on your right side are pretty stable, so we want you to try to get out on your right leg and stand on it. Well, I just collapsed, right? But they said, that was fabulous. Tomorrow we're going to try it again. Next day I got on the leg and was able to turn and sit in the chair. And not for long, because I couldn't sit for long. And then the next day I took 2 steps, and several days I eventually made it to the end of the bed, and probably a couple of weeks before I made it to the bathroom. But it's that whole notion of what can I do? And with physiotherapists who, that's how they are. That's how they are. They don't say, oh, no, you didn't do what we asked you to do. They said, look what you did.
Wow.
Look what you did. Tomorrow we'll try this.
Is this experience what inspired you to write the Appreciative Resilience book or create the resilience model?
We were actually kind of already on that path.
Yeah.
Because we found as we worked with teams and organizations, we'd be there to do strategic planning or team development or all kinds of work. And they would kind of sidle up to us and say, we're struggling. And we began to study, like, what was the experience, particularly of leaders, when they were experiencing challenging times and despair. And so we really focused, we started our resilience work focusing on strengths in times of despair, because we thought that's where the real energy was. And then Jeanie, we'd already started this work, and then Jeanie had her accident, and it kind of amplified this whole experience of challenging times and despair. And then as we began to talk to leaders, we began to understand the role of hope and a hopeful view in the experience of resilience. To hone that practice of hope on a daily basis, it's like filling a resilience reservoir. And then as we talked to leaders more, we realized the role forgiveness played in resilience. And so this was the beginning of this kind of intersecting appreciative resilience model of hope, despair, and forgiveness. But I wanted to go back to something that is so powerful in Jeanie's story, is that we experience the demands of life individually. Jeanie had an experience of her accident. I had an experience of her accident. Both those experiences took different kinds of resilience to bring us to today. And that, to me, is so important in resilience. It's not like, here, let me tell you what worked for me. No, it's about finding an individual resilience practice that allows you to access those places in the hardest of times. And it doesn't protect you from something bringing you to your knees. It's not like we can protect ourselves.
No, as much as we want to, right? I mean, we'd love to be able to do it. Wow, that's
wearing our armor doesn't really help, actually. You need to take it out. You need to be vulnerable.
I love everything that you guys are saying, and what's bubbling up for me though is how you can apply this theory of appreciative resilience to these movements that we have going on right now. We've got Black Lives Matter. We had, unfortunately, a bunch of massive shootings recently, attacks against women, all of these things. And it feels so overwhelming. And I can speak for myself. I'm so tired that I'm getting the news a couple of days late because I'm so burnt out on hearing about all of the bad things that are going on in the world. And so just kind of hearing what you guys are saying, what advice would you give to people as to how you can, one person can't solve all these big problems, right? But what tools would you give that person to just be able to get through day by day and not be so overwhelmed by all of the grief and troubles that we're seeing out there?
Do you want me to start? You want to start? I think for me, it's asking that question: what small thing did I do to foster hope in my colleagues that experience systemic racism every day? Like, I am a white woman of privilege living in a peaceful country, an amazing democracy. As a lesbian, I get to live freely in that democracy. I have all this privilege. And so one of the things I do for myself when I feel that incredible weariness is to go very small. What one thing did you do today to disrupt systemic racism? What one little microaggression did you push away from somebody experiencing it? And it's so tiny, it makes you want to cry because it's so tiny. And yet, I feel it's the tiny things that can push us forward. And everything we can do to support those people who are working for gun control, who are working in the streets, who are in every possible walk of life willing to stand up. And when you say something like that, and I feel like I'm almost brought to tears because it's not enough. But in that weariness, what is the one strength that's in that weariness? Well, today I called a friend. Today I called my, First Nations colleague who's a senior leader in the United States, and just said, "How you doing?" I thought about how I was in the little Asian grocery store yesterday and thought, how can I offer the tiniest thing here in an interchange between strangers? And it's not enough. So that was kind of a rambling answer.
No, I felt that. And I thank you so much for being so real and vulnerable. Kind of, I guess, adding to that, one part of your appreciative resilience model is talking about forgiveness. And I remember when I looked at this model, I'm thinking, that's a doozy. I think, at least for myself, I know that forgiveness is something I've struggled with giving people because I didn't feel that they deserved it. How does forgiveness, when it comes to your model, how does that help foster resilience?
Well, I think for forgiveness, there are lots of unforgivable acts. And yet, forgiveness, as we look at it and practice it and try to practice it, I should say, is to recognize an act has happened that's maybe unforgivable, or maybe it's just a little act that's you can easily just move on. But it's having the agency to be able to, and the will to be able to take on that and say, that's happened. We can't change that. That's the past. What can we do now? Even if it's just a tiny little thing. So in that forgiveness, it's the ability to move forward, to evolve into, if it's another person that you're dealing with, right? Or bigger situations. In some ways, it's kind of easier because you just say, oh, well, that's not going to change in my lifetime. And yet, as Joan's describing, it's every little act that will eventually change our lifetimes together, right? So I think the emphasis on those little acts in some of these huge crises.
Can I read a poem on forgiveness that
I was hoping you would. So
wrote for this book, because I think it really kind of speaks to this place in forgiveness.
Absolutely.
Forgiveness is not a blank slate. It does not offer absolution. It does not lighten the burden of past acts. Do not think it is easy, nor is it kind. Rather, it recognizes the power of rising again from the ashes of fires we ourselves ignited, of dousing the flamethrowers gripped by circumstance and evil. It is a letting go and a holding close. It abides in love and champions knowing, and it walks with a steely, willful force. Forgive me. And we write a fair bit about forgiveness as an act of will. That it is kind of the ultimate place of grace, where we recognize the harm in the world and we seek to venture and evolve anyway.
That's just powerful. And yeah, because you do seek to evolve. You choose to continue
Yeah.
even with everything that's going on. And just, going back to some of the stuff you were saying earlier, just, look at what you did. Look at what you did do, what that impact was, right? I know that one of the big things in AI is words create worlds, right?
Mhm.
You have that social constructionism. And so knowing that that little act is going to make a difference is something that we all can do. And we can appreciate this is impacting people, and you don't even know how it's going to impact them, right? So that's why you still have to come from that place of kindness, and that forgiveness sounds like it's not only for them, but it's also for yourself.
Yes. And sometimes that's the hardest, is self-forgiveness. A lot of the leaders we talked to, they said, I can forgive others, but I can't forgive myself. That's equally as important as forgiving others. Yeah. We're all in it, right? We're all in this world interacting, and we're not going to move ahead if we don't self-forgive as well.
I love it. And so for our listeners out there, I'm going to just try to paint this model that they have, which I'll post on the website. It's a circle, but within the circle, there are 3 smaller circles, and then they're joined together. Is that a Venn diagram?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
And the 3 circles are despair, hope, and forgiveness. And in the middle is the appreciative resilience. So if I was wanting to get to that sweet spot, how am I just practicing these small acts in each of these different sectors?
I think small acts and big acts in each of those places. Ask yourself, if you wanted something to do in the hope one, just a place to begin. Just to spend a minute as you go to sleep at night and ask yourself, what did I do to foster hope for myself and others today? It's a simple thing, right? In those challenging times where we're tired, what little thing did I do today that was strong? And if resilience has brought you to your knees, it might be, I got my shoes and socks on. I got out of bed. And that's a resilient act. Right? Or it might be bigger if it's a less challenging time, right? And in forgiveness, to say, you know what, I let go just a tiny bit. And one of the things we all know about forgiveness is we do it, and then we do it again, and then we do it again. And then we do it several more times. And maybe the distance grows between the times we do it, right? It's not like a single thing we do. But to say to yourself, what did I let go a little bit today that allowed me some space? And so it's just a place to kind of begin a little bit. And
and all of that, as you're, we're talking about self kind of doing this, right? But you're also interacting and hopefully supporting others by having conversations around the challenges of forgiveness, right? For example, or what's working in this time of despair for you, for me, and what could we be doing together that would even strengthen the ability for us to have some hope? I mean, hope is the place we'd like to be. It's kind of the hopeful view of the world is kind of allows us to actually venture out there in the world and continue on going and evolving. And so what is it we can do through, you don't necessarily even go through despair. You might be just living in it for a while. But what is it we can do within that will help us focus on what's happening well? What are our strengths in that time? And how can we let go? How can we forgive and let go? Because it's so easy to just hold on to, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get stuck in my own little thing here, right? But that doesn't help me or you or,
I wanted to go back. I'm not sure which one of you said this at the beginning. You talked about kind of grit as an example of resilience. And one of the things that Jeanie and I noodle on, and we call our work in resilience a commentary intentionally, because we're a couple of, privileged women, right? So our experiences in life, we have to come to our work from that lens. But that said, one of the things we noodle on about the notion of grit is that to create a resilience practice might result in grit for me, courage for Jeanie, retreat for one of you, quitting work for another. That we think that resilience output is the same for all of us. And it's profoundly individual. And I think that helps people say, it keeps people from saying my resilience isn't good enough. I didn't exhibit grit in this area, right? Maybe what I said was, you're talking to me and I'm overwhelmed by these big issues. So I'm actually not going to say anything. I just want to sit. That an act of resilience is actually an act of retreat sometimes. And so I think we get attached to sometimes it looking like a particular thing. Resilience looks like a particular thing for people. And we consider that it doesn't. That it's very individual.
And that's like and again, Appreciative Inquiry works so well to engage people in those kinds of conversations with each other because they share those stories. And sometimes you actually connect to one another because you've shared some stories of your own resilience. Rather than saying, well, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you'll be resilient. Well, we all have we have lots of ways. And I think one of the ways is the human connection to share what that means and to recognize the diversity of because we're all coming from different perspectives of privilege and lack of privilege or whatever, different cultures, races, sexes, all that kind of stuff. So by sharing our stories, that and the systemic despair that you were referring to earlier about that, racism and so on. I mean, that's systemic despair, big time, right? And so those are huge things we need to actually have conversations about. That it's not okay, right? It's not okay. So let's share our stories about what are we trying, however small, to shift our world away from that systemic despair. So more of us in the world can actually hope and evolve into the next whatever stage of being in a way that's not so painful.
Yeah, no, I love everything that you're saying. And just the fact that you even broke it down and said, this is going to be individual and it's going to look different for every single person. And that result's going to be different. I think that that's so important because sometimes we get so wrapped up on, well, I didn't get that exact result, or I'm not doing enough of X, Y, Z, and just knowing, hey, this might be it. The fact that you got up today, that was enough for you today. The next day, maybe you get up and you brush your teeth. Hey, you've already won. And so you're able to practice this in such a way that it's actually, from hearing you guys talk about it, it sounds like there's small acts of kindness for yourself in these different areas that get you to that appreciative resilience. Does that sound about right?
Well, and I think appreciative resilience is fundamentally kind. It seeks to do what you need to do individually. And so, Jeanie said this before, our view of appreciative resilience is not do these 19 things by Tuesday and you too can have, whatever in life. It really is to begin wherever you are and say, that was pretty amazing today. I got my socks on. That was good. It was good. And we see this a lot in grief, which I always think about as a type of despair. When people say, we've been grieving for a year now, so it's going to be over soon. Well, maybe not. Maybe this is an abiding grief that's going to stay for a long time. I don't say this in the book, but I say this when I talk about despair. Despair is like a bad house gust. It comes, it eats your food, it leaves your clothes all over the place, it doesn't tidy up, it refuses to leave, it doesn't pay rent, it just stays. And you're kind of going like, when are you leaving? And it just kind of looks at you and goes, I kind of like hanging out here. Right? Despair stays with us until it is finished with us. And to abide in that state is really hard. And yet we all know people around us who are abiding in that state.
But even that state, right, it isn't constant all the time, right? So, I mean, it's one of those things where I can say for myself, I've made a decision with my partner that we're not having children, and that's really more his decision, and I'm acquiescing to it. And so that grief will hit me at completely unexpected times, and I just have to sit in it until it passes, because you know what? Yeah, it doesn't matter what my to-do list says. My body and my emotions like, nope, we're dealing with this other thing right now because you're grieving. And then the next day I could be fine, or the next hour, right? You just don't know where it's going to be. And so just having this tool, I think, is going to be helpful to just help sit with it, but also help snap out of it.
And, we think about those 3 interlocking circles of hope, despair, and forgiveness like elastic bands. And they expand and contract all the time, sometimes moment by moment. Right? And a CEO I was talking to who had read the book, she said, that Venn diagram, she said, that's an hour in my life. Hope, despair, and forgiveness is an hour in my life. And then I do it again. Right? And so you're right. It's like things arrive and go. They don't kind of occupy all of our time. Yeah.
In one of because I watched one of your videos recently about your appreciative resilience, and I think Jeanie may have mentioned this, but she talked about practicing hope is like a bank which you can draw on during trying times. And that really resonated with me, because sometimes we might think, okay, I'm doing these little things, but like, how is this really going to get me through the pandemic? How is this really going to get me through the fact that my husband lost his job? And so, but when I think of it as like, not like a transaction, like, okay, well, I'm going to take out 5 kind acts that I did, but I really see it as a reserve, right? That these kind acts are going to be building up within me, that I would then have the strength to then handle whatever hardship or trying time I'm in. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the gratitude practice that I just love it. I love it, morning gratitude, writing it down and so on. To me, when I'm waking up kind of going, oh, I didn't sleep very well last night because I'm stressed about this, that, or the other thing. If I start there with my morning tea and have just pause, right? And actually have those moments of feeling appreciative of the world. There are some, there are good things, even amongst the stuff that's stressing me out, right? And kindness. I think we live in a province, BC, British Columbia, that our chief medical officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, she began last year when the COVID was, getting started, with always ending her reports to the population of British Columbia.
Every day.
Every day she would say, at the end, she'd say, most importantly, be kind, be calm, and be safe. And she's never ever stopped doing that. And it's just a way of taking a whole population, a whole province, and saying, this is the most important. Yes, washing your hands, do all the other things she's talking about. Don't assemble and, all that stuff, all the rules. But at the end of everyone was, be kind, be calm, be safe. I think that's a good resilience practice just in itself, is to remember those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I figure, if you ladies are okay with it, we'll end with our 2 signature questions. And I know there's 2 of you, so I get double the answers. I love it.
Double the wisdom. I'm so excited.
Yes. So ladies.
I'm scared. I'm just saying.
Courage.
Be scared.
Courage.
Looking back, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Jeannie's trying to figure out the age factor, being a mathematician and all. I think one of the I gotta say something. My mother used to say this. We lived in a very rural area, and so once in a long time we get to do something like go and get an ice cream cone. It's really a rare occurrence in my family. And my mother would finish her ice cream cone, and she would look at me and go, "My, that was good." And she said it right till the day that she died, when something was going on. And I believe in my heart of hearts that's what she said the day she died to herself. My, that was good. And so I think that's what I'd say to my younger self. It's gonna be good. Not easy, but it's gonna be good.
I was born shy, according to my mother. She said she'd never met a baby born shy. So I spent a lot of my childhood kind of trying to learn how not to be shy and get out in the world. So I say back there, you did it, girl. You did a really good job. You worked hard at it, and you did it. You're out in the world.
I love that energy. That's amazing. I just want to bottle that up.
Took a lot of years.
I'll bet. But you know what? You got there. I love that. Looking forward, what one wish do you have for yourself on your current journey?
I think that the wish I have for myself is to never assume that I understand the world. That to never assume that I'm not going to meet somebody today, like the two of you. It gets me thinking. Like, I wish for myself that I learn the moment before I die. That and my list. I want a list on the day I die. I always have a list of things that I don't get done. Melissa knows this. Some of them are for her, but I never get done. I want to end my life with a list of uncompleted things.
I want to not complete things. I want to play. I just want to play. And that's okay. I don't have to do things all the time. So my advice to my future is to just get off that list and go play. Make Joan come with me.
Thank you two so much for agreeing to join Siria and I today.
That's it for this episode. We want to hear from you. What is one small act of kindness you have shown yourself today? Let us know on Instagram or on our private Facebook group, Pivotal Moments HQ. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening. Remember, it's never too late and you're right on time.